everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. I just really wanted to introduce Karen. Karen is an OT who specialises in sensory processing disorder, and I was actually recommended Karen about 3 years ago now, when I was having some issues with Kai and recognised that they might be due to sensory processing. And after having an assessment done by Kai, I realised very quickly that a lot of the questions that come up with other parents of children with SATB2, there's a lot of similarities. So I thought it'd be really nice for Karen to share her expertise with you guys. And I just hope that actually, you know, you can take some of this that Karen has shared with me and recognise it, and it helps to explain sometimes why your children do some of the things they do or how to help them in the future. So thank you, Karen, for joining us tonight, and I'll hand over to you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Maria. Hello, everybody. It's really good to see everyone this evening. First of all, I'm just going to take a moment out and just share my screen, if it'll let me do it. This one. Oh, that is not the beginning. Right, okay, so yes, so as Maria said, my name is Karen Forrest, and I'm an independent occupational therapist, and I've been asked to come and talk to you about sensory integration or sensory processing, same thing really, and SATB2-associated syndrome. And you guys are the experts on that, not me, but hopefully we can put our brains together and have some really good thoughts about what sensory integration means for your children and young adults. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about me to start with. What I will say is, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Alison will let me know that they've come in. You can ask questions at any time. I might just defer them to the end if they'll sit better then, but otherwise I'm happy to answer questions whenever they pop up. We have had an advanced question, and I'm going to save that one for the end actually. Okay, so I started working with people with learning disability and autism when I was about 14 years old, and I always like to tell this story because it would never happen these days, but I was at school and I wanted some work experience. So they sent me to a big old fashioned institution, of which there isn't many of them around now. There is one that I can think of. So yeah, so that's how I started in this field. I started as a care assistant in the hospital before doing my OT training, so I've got a degree in that. And then I worked for donkey's years with people with learning disabilities in the community, and also in hospitals actually. And for most of that time, I practiced sensory integration, but at various levels. So kind of what I want to get over to you, I suppose, is I've been doing this for years, and there's only so much we're going to be able to get over in an hour and a half, but I'll do my best. So I'm now what they call an advanced practitioner. But as I say, it's the experience that's key. Theoretically, you could do your sensory integration training, one module after another, or module after another and another, and then you'd be an advanced practitioner. But I would argue you're not, because without sort of a good few years training, you haven't really learned anything. You learn on the job with the people. So yes, as I said, I'm in private practice now. Used to work for the NHS, but my main customer is actually the NHS, and I get commissioned as a specialist nationwide on a spot purchase basis. So excuse me, I've got a little fly buzzing around in my screen. So I've worked with one child with SATB2-associated syndrome, and that was in 2020. I think Maria's given the game away as to who that child was. So obviously we've got a bit of a confidentiality issue here. I'm not going to refer to Kai too much because of that, but Maria's kind of agreed on Kai's behalf that, you know, we can talk a little bit about that. I am still learning. There's just so much to learn in this field. Pretty much every more complex cases, but every complex case that I get, I end up doing more and more research to learn. about what's going on. So my special interests really don't apply so much to your children and young adults, but I've got a real interest in trauma and attachment. So I work a lot now with people who've had adverse experiences in their early years. And I've also got a special interest in working in natural environments as well, in the great outdoors, which has become more and more important with COVID. Okay. The big question is, what is sensory integration, or AIRS sensory integration? So it started off with the work of Dr. Gene Trust in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. Believe it or not, it was that long ago. And as I said before, sensory integration and sensory processing are largely the same thing. There's been a bit of a division in the field, which you don't need to worry yourselves about. And some therapists have gone one way and some have gone another, and there's just some different terminology, which isn't very helpful for you guys, but kind of that's the way it is. So what does it mean? So sensory integration is a normal process that happens. So it refers to the way that the brain and the nervous system all together registers, so in other words, picks up sensory information, prioritizes it, decides what's important, what's not, because you can't be attending to everything all the time. Modulates, so by that we mean turning up and turning down. So I need to turn up the things that are important and I need to turn down the things that aren't. So visually at the minute, you guys are important, and my screen share is important because that's what I'm working with. I'm pretty much not aware of the cars driving past on the street. So I've dialed up the visual and I've dialed down that auditory. Okay. Discriminate. So that's about then, after we've dialed it up, dialed it down, do we understand what it means? Do we understand all that sensory information? Can we put it all together and integrate it and understand our world as a whole around us? And then once we've got all of that, can we respond to it? Can we use that information and give a good, what we call an adaptive response? And so you probably worked out at this stage, sensory integration underlies absolutely everything. It underlies all learning, all behaviour, all activity. It's kind of the fundamentals. So it develops through infancy and childhood, but it gets better through life. It develops rapidly through childhood, but you never lose the ability to continue developing. That's kind of about in the last 20 odd years or so. Before then, they thought what wasn't done in childhood, that was it, tough luck. But we know now it can improve throughout life. And it develops through our experiences and our interactions with the environment. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So there's this sensory integration, there's sensory processing, and then there's AIRS sensory integration. So that's just named after Gene Trust, who I mentioned, and it describes a very particular intervention delivered according to strict fidelity requirements. It's very evidence-based. It's super if you can get it. It's not widely available in the UK, not on the NHS anyway, but it's very, very good. But it's not, it's not the be-all and end-all. We are able to do other things as well. And I'll come on to that a bit more. So, I suppose this bit is where we're focused, really. So sensory integration itself, it's a normal developmental process. But what we're interested, I suppose, sadly, is kind of sensory integration dysfunction. So because sensory integration is this normal developmental process, if something goes a bit wrong, so as I said, some of the children that I work with have difficulties with trauma in their early years, perhaps it's to do with a learning disability or autism, that development can be kind of interrupted, I suppose, and the sensory integration can become impaired. And that's very often linked to neurodevelopmental disorders like autism. Okay. And the presentations can vary depending on the sensory system. So when I say that, I mean, is it sound? Is it vision? That's the sensory systems. And the aspects of sensory integration involved. So is it to do with registration or the modulation side, or that discrimination bit where you're working out what it all means? So there are many, many, many different presentations of sensory integration. It's very pick and mix. So you can be oversensitive to some things, undersensitive to other things, and not able to work out what other things mean. So we reckon about 1 in 10 children have some form of sensory integration dysfunction, which is phenomenal. So that's 3 in every classroom. And for many, it's not resolved and it continues into adulthood. And I'll talk a bit more about that as well a bit later on. And if I forget, remind me. So what does this all mean for your children? And how does it relate to SATB2-associated syndrome? So sensory and neurodevelopmental conditions go together, and SATB2 is a neurodevelopmental condition. And also off your the SATB2 Gene Trust's sort of paperwork, I picked up that it's associated with autistic tendencies. And studies show that about, well, I think it's more the higher end, the 95% of individuals with autism have impaired sensory integration. So we know there's this really, really big link. And so much so that in recent years, and I'm just trying to think when it came out, but the new diagnostic manual, the American one, the DSM-5, I think it is, they've now started to think about sensory integration problems as almost like diagnostic criteria for autism. So we've got this massive link between sensory and autism. So I'm thinking, if SATB2 is a neurodevelopmental condition and it's got autistic tendencies, there's a huge chance that there are sensory integration difficulties implicated for your guys. So that's what I reckon. Okay. So, oh, have I gone one too many? With me, I think I've lost a slide. That's a bit sad. Oh no, it's me getting confused. Okay, so what does sensory integration dysfunction look like in SATB2? So there is no research. I had a look. I didn't spend ages, but I still haven't found any. Obviously, when I worked with Kai, I had a look to see if there was any then, and I checked before I did this presentation, and I can't find any. And as I said before, the sensory integration presentations differ wildly between different people. So that it's theoretically possible that all your children might have sensory problems, but none of them might look the same. Or it might be the case that there is a very definite profile, and that research has just not been done. So I've worked with one child, as I said, with the syndrome. So in therapy terms, that makes me an expert, because, that's one more child than other therapists have worked with. But of course, in reality, I'm as in the dark as anyone else, really. But what I will say is that some of the things that I saw when I was working with Kai, and some of the things that I see when I read up on SATB2 on your website, I recognise as rooted in sensory integration dysfunction. And as I tell you a little bit more about sensory integration dysfunction, I think you'll see what I mean, and the bells will start to ring for you too. So what I'm really interested in, I suppose, is there a SATB2 sensory profile? Are there similarities between children in terms of their sensory presentation? And what I thought we could do on a very, very small and not very robust scale is start a little bit of research tonight, really. So what I would ask you to do is, as I'm talking, if something rings a bell for you and you don't mind, just drop it in the chat. And what Alison's going to do is she's just going to keep an eye on that and just have a look for themes, just to see if people are having similar thoughts on how their children are presenting in relation to what I'm saying. And it's just for our interest, really. But this is how these things start. I'm just going to wave to David. Okay. Is everybody with me so far? The people I can see, can you give me a thumbs up? Are we good? Fab. Okay. So, believe it or not, the easiest way I found to describe all of this is to talk a little bit about how infants and human babies develop, because it's all quite complicated, but we'll do what we can. What I want to get over to you really is when you're born, it's a bit like having a box of, I don't know, Lego or something. It's all there in the box, but none of it joins up. Okay, so in your box, you've got a whole bunch of sense receptors, and we'll talk about those in a minute. We've got the nerves, and we've got your brain, and we've got your spinal cord, so your central nervous system, and we've got the muscles and joints. They're all there, and none of them are connected, apart from through primitive reflexes, which is what I call your factory settings. So you know those. You know that if you pop your finger in a baby's hand, it will squeeze your finger. So that's a primitive reflex. That's a connection that's already made. We're born with a few of those, okay? And the key about those is they have to disappear as you get older. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they hang around and cause problems. And those primitive reflexes, they're kind of hardwired into you. Well, no, hardwired's the wrong word. It's not hardwired because they're going to disappear, but you're born with them. And the idea is they get you born. So there's some that when you turn your neck a certain way, your body will go straight, and that's to squeeze you through the birth canal. And then there's others that make sure you take care of yourself when you're a baba. So just in evolutionary terms, we'd have had to have hung on to our mummies when they were covered in hair. Not anymore. And then we've got rooting reflex, so the ones that help us to suck milk. So you stroke the baby's cheek and it comes in ready to suck. So there's a whole series of those. That's a real problem if that one hangs around, isn't it? If someone strokes your cheek and you're constantly like that. So you're born with a box of bits and you have to put yourself together. But nobody's thought of it like that before. But that's how it is. So I'm going to get you thinking for a bit. What are the senses? So I wonder if people can put in the chat, and if Alison can come on to speaker, and we can do a list of what all the senses are. Let's hear them. What have you got?
I'm here. Nobody's added anything yet. What do you guys think? Smell, taste.
There's some that are really easy.
Smell and taste.
What was that? Smell and taste. Yeah. Smell, taste. Yeah.
Hearing.
Hearing. Yeah.
Sight.
Sight. Yeah.
And touch.
Touch. Is that it?
Also, we've been at it.
Okay. You've got a few more than that, which comes as a surprise to people, actually, doesn't it? Because we're told we've got 5 senses, we've got loads of senses. So I'll run through them all now. So one that you won't have thought of is your vestibular sense. So this is the one that lives in your inner ear and tells you about head position and movement. That's right, I'm having some help there. Okay, so it's a really, really important sense, and it's what your balance is based on. You've then got another sense called proprioception. So those receptors live in your muscles and your joints and your tendons, and they tell you how hard your muscles are working, and they tell you where your body parts are. So I know my arm is out behind my back. I can't see it. No, I won't even look in the screen. But I know it's there because my muscles and joints are firing off and telling me it's there. It's another really important sense, and that's the one that gives us our body awareness. We've got tactile, which you told me about, which is good. So that's touch. So you've got that in your skin, you've got that in your mouth, and those run on different nerves. You've got light touch, so tickly touch. Ooh. You've got deep touch, which is nice. It's like massage, and when we're feeling things to work out what shape things are. That's called discrimination. And we've got social touch, when we hug and stroke each other. All really important. And when we're small, particularly, it's really important because it tells us where our body ends and somebody else starts, or something else starts. We've got our auditory sense, hearing. You got that one, well done. We've got vision. Olfaction is a posh word for smelling. Gustation is a posh word for tasting. And then we've got the last group of senses, I would say these are. We bunch them all together because they all fire into the same part of the brain called the insula, but it's called interoception. So these are the ones that live in your body and tell you how you're doing. So it's things like body temperature, hunger, being thirsty, needing a wee. But also those ones are really vital in recognising your emotions. So if I have a certain set of senses firing off in my body, I can add them up together and know how I'm feeling. So it might be like tense shoulders, hot face, tense in my hands, and I know I'm angry. Really important. So that's the senses. Oh, okay. So, as I said, it's a put yourself together job. And we make the connections through our ongoing experiences. So I'll give you an example. So when my little boy, he was now 20, how old is he? 21, was a baby and sat in bed with me, and I watched him. And he was just sort of gazing down the length of his body, really. And he watched his own foot move. So he'd got this random movement in his foot. And he must have put together the fact that he saw this thing at the end of the bed move, but he'd also experienced a sensation in his foot. And you almost saw him make the connection. Well, you did see him make the connection, because he went, oh, did I do that? And then he did it again. Oh my goodness, I did. And then he did it again. Oh my God, it keeps working. So that was a connection built. Okay, and that's what we have to do. And that's very, very simple at that level, but it goes on and becomes very, very complex. So we need to learn how to register, prioritize, modulate, so turn up, turn down, and discriminate, understand what those sensations all mean. We need to put together a response to that, and then we need to understand how did we perform, and take that feedback to keep on making the connections. And it starts off really, really simple, because you know, don't you, that babies are functioning at a really, really kind of simple level to what you see maybe with an adult. So you get that, and then you get like these super ACE gene people, maybe like the David Beckhams of the world, who are incredibly integrated. So it's all a bit of a continuum. We're all on there somewhere. Okay. So to start with, the connections are kind of less than optimal, as I said, and they need refining through use. And this is why little kids are kind of clumsy and volatile. So the clumsiness comes from they don't really know what their body parts are doing. They haven't built the connections yet. So they crash and bang into things. They're heavy-handed. And volatile, that comes from they haven't really learnt to kind of modulate. So they haven't learnt to respond properly to different sensations. And if the refining doesn't happen, it just persists. The problems persist. And we used to call dyspraxic children clumsy children, so you can see why now, perhaps. And if a connection doesn't get used, it gets pruned out. Your brain will take that away. Now that sounds a bit scary, doesn't it? But actually it's a very good thing. You actually lose connections in some ways as you grow older, in a good way, because then the brain can kind of concentrate on the ones that are important. So for example, we're all, like, you might know this, we're all born with the capability of speaking many languages. But when we're exposed to maybe one or two languages in infancy, we kind of lose the ability to learn languages easily, and that's due to pruning. It's still possible, but it's much harder. So that's all good. So have I still got everybody? Because it is complex. Can I have a thumbs up from, oh, thank you. Okay, so we have to, as I said, register the sensation. We have to prioritise it, turn it up, turn it down. Okay, that's modulation. We'll come on to that a bit more. We have to stick it all together with all the other senses, integrate it, and then we come up with our response. Okay, and these are the responses that are reliant on sensory integration primarily. So you've got your primitive responses we've spoken about. Arousal. So by that I mean neurological arousal, so how awake we are really. It stands to reason, and I'm not going to do it. If I clap loudly, you'd all be like this, wouldn't you? But if we take a lot of sensation away, if we dim the light levels, if we take the sound down, you might feel less aroused and sleepier. So arousal is a response that's directly related to sensation. And linking on from that, attention. Okay, so we need to be able to appreciate the sensory characteristics of something in order to be able to pay attention to it. So this is where it gets important for learning. Emotion. So you know yourself, you'll all have your own sensory preferences. So if you get really bothered by something, so some people are really bothered by light touch, for example, it can really make you moody. And leading on from that, especially if you perhaps have a learning disability and you can't regulate yourself terribly well, it can lead on to difficult behaviour as well. Or if it's a positive thing, very positive behaviour. So those kind of all make sense. Posture's one that people struggle a little bit more with, so I'll explain about that. So with posture, do you remember I said about that sense that lives in your inner ear, and it's called the vestibular sense, and it tells you where your head position is. So I'm relying on that to tell me where gravity is, and where my head position is will tell my muscles and joints, basically. Well, it tells my brain, and then my brain tells my muscles and joints how to stay upright. Because unless I know where my head is, my body won't know how to stay upright. I'm getting copied. I'm going to do Simon Says in a minute. Okay, so that's posture. And you see these children, don't you, flip-floppy all over the place. And that's why. Eye control, very similar as well. We need to know where our head is and how our head is moving in order to control our eyes. Because what we need to do is, no matter how we're moving, we still need a stable visual field. So, you know, if you're walking along, if your eyes didn't respond in the instant, the whole world would look like it was doing this, wouldn't it? But it doesn't. It's a stable visual field, because as your head moves, you get very quick messages into the brain and then very quick messages back to the eye that counteracts the body movement. So that's all very important. And finally, practice. So practice comes from mainly that vestibular sense, vision, proprioception, knowing where your muscles and joints are, and tactile discrimination, being able to understand what you're touching. And praxis is basically the idea of an action, sending a plan for that action, and then doing the action in a coordinated fashion. So this is when you're learning a new thing. So if, for example, I was to teach you a new dance routine or something like that, you would have to have a good idea of how your body works and where you are in space in order to be able to copy me and to do the dance routine. If we were learning to tie shoelaces, for example, you need to know what your touch is telling you in order to be able to do that task. So really that's what practice is. It's quite a complicated area. And I suppose one of the ways I've described it before, since we're all mostly a UK audience, is if anybody's seen Benedict Cumberbatch in Sherlock, and if you remember back to that programme, if you saw it, every so often he would kind of the scene would stop, and it would go into kind of the inner workings of his mind, and he'd be working something out, and he'd be taking in all sorts of different sensory information. So, you know, he can see something at 100 paces and he can hear this, and it really slows down that process and then shows how he decides what he's going to do and how he works out what to do. And really that is praxis. That's what praxis is. It's being able to take all that sensory information and produce a coordinated action. And it's something that uses our brain. And then once we've learned it, we've got muscle memory, we can do it. It's fine. We don't need to use our brain anymore, and it's not praxis anymore. But while you're learning it, it's praxis. Okay. So this is what we call a pyramid of learning. And I put this on here to help you understand how important this is. So really, I'm talking about working at the bottom 2 levels. Can you see tactile, vestibular, proprioception? They're so important. And people think sensory integration is all about ear defenders and dimmer switches and things like that, but they're not even on that bottom level. They're not that fundamental. It's much more about movement and exercise, really. And it's how things are built up, really. So we need to get those tactile, vestibular, proprioception bits in first, those building blocks, and then everything gets built on the top. And if you see at the top, I can't quite make it. I have to move it's academic learning, they call it on this one. Academic learning is right at the very top there, and everything builds up to that. So it's just so fundamental, really, in everything we do. And we'll come on to that one a bit more, I think. Have I got everybody still? Thumbs up? Are we all good? Okay. So sensory integrated dysfunction. So like before, when I talked about the typical and then where it kind of goes a bit wrong, the same here. So I've just talked about the typical, and this is where the dysfunction comes in. Right, this is a tricky slide, but I'll do my best with it. So this is just a model of sensory integration dysfunction. You don't need to really worry about it too much, but it is quite helpful. It says at the bottom on the reference that it's in press. It's actually been published now. It's just an old slide that I've used. And there's a bit of variance in the language. Remember I said that was a problem before. We've got a hand up there. Oh, no, the hand's gone down. Okay. But if you look down the middle column, you can see all those senses there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The one that's not on there is interoception. Now, the reason why that's not on there is it's just a new concept for the field. And you can imagine these models and things, they take years to devise, and kind of they haven't caught up with that yet. Okay, so we're going to concentrate for now on the left-hand side of this table. Okay, so the middle is inadequate CNS, that just stands for central nervous system, integration and processing of sensation. So in other words, there could be something a bit off with any of those sensations. Now, on the left-hand side of the table, it talks about sensory responsivity, which is the stuff you might be familiar with, actually, because this is this modulation thing. You know, I said this turning up and turning down. Some people don't turn up enough, and some people don't turn down enough. And that can vary between the senses, and very often, actually, in autism does vary between the senses. So the people who don't turn down enough can be what we call overreactive or over-responsive. And these are the people who don't like being touched, and they don't like loud noises. And you might even recognise yourselves in this. We're all got kind of different sensory preferences. They might be bothered by bright lights or moving visual stimuli, for example. So those are the people who are over-responsive. And those are the senses that people typically tend to be over-responsive in, I have to say. And then, flip side of that, you've got the people who can't turn up. And so it kind of, I don't know, the world's going on around them, and then they're not responding at all, because they just can't turn the stuff up that's important to be able to respond to it. And these are very floppy people. And that typically, but not always, but I see that most in the vestibular sense and the proprioceptive sense. You also get vestibular over responsivity as well, actually, but very often in your guys I see under. So that's what that is really. And then as we come out, so yeah, you see that's modulation. As we come out, what are the behavioural consequences? So what does that look like? Okay, so if you can't dial things up, it's very, very difficult to pay attention. If you can't dial things down, it's very difficult to pay attention, because you can hear absolutely everything, or see absolutely everything, or feel absolutely everything. It's very hard to stay regulated, and by that I mean to have an even level of arousal, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. It's very hard not to get moody. Affect means mood, basically. You might see withdrawal or avoidance of sensory experiences. So I know people who would much prefer to sit under a table all day than have to put up with bright lights or loud music or whatever else might be going on. You might see sensory seeking. So the under-responsive people, instead of just letting the world go on around them, they might actually do something to fix it. And then you see these kind of seeking behaviours. So rocking is a very good example of that. And more in the guys who kind of have a bit more insight, when you're different, it can mess with your self-esteem. Okay. And it just makes life difficult. So we've got these occupational challenges right on the far end. So it just means engaging in life is difficult. So that's that modulation piece. The flip side of that is sensory discrimination perception. So this is the bit, the understanding it. Okay, all right, you might be able to turn it up and turn it down, but can you use that sensory information? Okay, so when you can't use that sensory information very well, the sorts of things you might see are poor, what we call poor postural ocular control. So that's exactly what I've just spoken about, and you see the two together very often. So they've got poor posture, and they find it really, really difficult to keep a stable visual field. And so quite a lot of dyslexic people are like this, actually, and they're kind of slumping at the desk at school, and life is tricky. You've got poor visual motor performance. That's stuff like hand-eye coordination is poor. And you've got poor body percept. In other words, it's exactly what I said. You don't know what your body parts are doing and where they are. I quite often ask people to lie straight on the ground, and they can't lie straight. They look like a banana because they've got no idea where straight is. Then moving out, we've got these kind of two presentations of dyspraxia that we think about as OT. So we've got VBIS, stands for Vestibular Bilateral and Integration. No, I'm going to get that right. Vestibular Bilateral Integration and Sequencing Disorder. So this is rooted in poor vestibular processing and very often proprioceptive as well. And this is, you very often get that poor posture with it, but they find it very, very difficult to use the two sides of their body together. So it's things like riding bikes, even sitting at the table, they're a bit side on. It's very difficult, that coordination of both sides of the body. Then you've got somatodyspraxia. Somata just means of the body, and it just means that kind of there's a bit more proprioception and touch, poor processing involved in this one. And this is what we see as a classic dyspraxia. And I'm going to show you a video of that in a minute. So these are the children who are perfectly bright, but cannot learn to tie their shoelaces. And there's no reason for it apart from they can't put together all the sensations and can't send out a coordinated plan. That's what's going on there. And I think a lot about under and over reactions, that left-hand side of the table, and about what that means for kind of mood and behaviour and things like that. And I just think we massively underestimate the right-hand side of the table, because these kids really struggle to do everything. It's such hard work for them. They get exhausted, they try and cover it up, they'll clown and mess about, particularly when they're younger, to try and hide it. They avoid things, you know, the coordination bit's obvious. I've already spoke about that, sorry. Poor organisation, that comes from that ideation. So as well as kind of not being able to do a coordinated action, it's very difficult for them to have the idea, the concept of it, because they've just got nothing to work with. And they also might sensory seek as well. So you might seek to get more, but you might also seek to understand better. So you might seek touch because you're under responsive to touch and need touch, or you might seek touch because actually the information you get from your hands isn't very good, so you need more, you need to really feel things. And again, I think it's more obvious this time how that impacts on people's activities of daily living. If you're still sticking with this, folks, you're doing really, really well, because it's quite complex stuff, but that's essentially where we are. Okay, is everybody all right there? Yeah, okay. So just thinking about the arousal side a little bit more, because this was really, really relevant. Oh, have we got a hand up there? Yeah. Oh, here was a thumbs up from Alison. Thank you, Alison. This we found was relevant, I think. So I said that it's a bit obvious, really, how your senses impact on your arousal. So some things will wake you up and some things will kind of calm you down. And really, we want to be in that pale blue, the very palest blue, the optimum arousal, the calm alert state. That's where we engage with people. That's where we kind of learn. And the people who are in there tend to be typical people, or people who've sought sensation to put themselves there. Okay. But below that, we have under arousal. So these are the floppy people. These are the people who, you know, the world's going on around them and they're not responding. And then above the optimum arousal, we've got over arousal. And these are where the people who are sensory reactive kind of sit, or, you know, they might be sensory seeking and have overdone it. So you quite often see that, people rocking and rocking to bring themselves up, and then they just go too far and they're on the ceiling. And then we get shut down. Okay, now I have to say this is I've simplified this massively. It's a bit more complex than this. But I just wanted to bring this in because sometimes I quite often see people say things like, oh, we'll just let him carry on because he'll blow himself out in a minute. And that's shut down. That's not a nice place to be. Really, we want to bring people down the levels rather than letting themselves blow themselves out. So I'll give you an example. I worked with a man. I got it just terribly wrong for him. We did something that was kind of out of the usual. And in the end, he became a bit hyper with what we were doing. And kind of we just let him go off and sleep. And people thought he was asleep. And he slept for ages. Ages and ages, much longer than kind of the nursing staff ever thought he would. And they went in to see if he was okay, and they spoke to him and he didn't respond. And oh gosh, we better check. And they picked his hand up and his hand just stayed there, and that was shut down. So it looks like sleep, but actually it's just when everything kind of it's kind of like you've had a short circuit almost. So that's why I raised that, really. So regulation is everything. That's the first, even in therapy, that's the first thing we work with. We try and get people into that optimum arousal state. And for you guys, and this is what we found helpful working clinically, was to really, really concentrate on ways to get to optimum arousal and stay there, because that's where you get the best out of your young people, and they get the best out of life. Actually, it's not a one-way thing. Okay, I just wanted to show you a video on dyspraxia, because I'm really conscious that your guys tend to have learning disabilities, and so the dyspraxia can get really lost in the learning disability, so it can be quite hard for you to understand. So I just wanted to show you what dyspraxia looks like in a kid without learning disability. Just hope you understand what that piece looks like on its own. So just bear with me while I try and find it, because this has been flummoxing me. Okay, good. I hope you can all see that.
Hi, my name's Joe. You might already know that about me. You probably looked at the file and already got a tiny glimpse into who I am. You could even just look at me and getting an early impression of myself. However, there's something you don't know about me or may not have realised. I have a medical condition called Dyspraxia. You may know what it is, but let me tell you more about it anyway. Dyspraxia is a form of developmental coordination disorder. It affects my motor and coordination skills, but it can come across as clumsy to people who do not know about the condition. Keeping up with the class can be a struggle for me sometimes. For example, whenever I'm supposed to copy notes, sometimes it can feel like everyone else is light years ahead of me. This causes me to feel scared to ask the teacher for help because of the possibility of looking stupid in front of the class. Presentations are always a disaster since my dyspraxia can affect my speech clarity and often gives me stage fright. I often feel like I occasionally keep my class waiting. Things such as getting dressed and tying my shoelaces can take forever. It's also a bit embarrassing when people think I'm a messy eater. Exams tend to be pretty much impossible for me. I need more time to complete homework. But despite the negatives of having dyspraxia, there are many positives of having the condition. For example, I'm pretty good with computers and technology. Although I have dyspraxia, I'm always optimistic. Slideshows and visuals are two techniques that help me prepare my presentations. Having dyspraxia has helped me think outside the box in situations. Communication, patience, and understanding. I know that myself and many other people with the condition dyspraxia can excel in life with just a little help and accommodation. Thanks for listening.
Bear with me. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to show you that so you kind of got an idea of kind of what dyspraxia looks like on its own. Okay, interoception. So this is this set of senses, almost the ones that kind of root into the interior of the brain, the body senses. Just wanted to mention them quickly. So they're a new concern for the field, and the models haven't caught up yet, as I said before. But they can be impacted in exactly the same ways, really, as the other senses. So you can have problems in knowing what the body needs, so food, drink, when to stop eating or drinking, when to stop eating because you feel sick, when you need the toilet both times, or both sorts, when you need to warm up, when you need to cool down, when you need to relax or rest, maybe you're sick or you're tired, when you need to sleep, when you need to scratch, when you need pain relief, and sex as well. It is all built into interoception. So what's interesting about interoception is it gives us our gut feelings, and without those we have to rely more on rules and routines. Starting to sound familiar? And social situations are particularly difficult without gut feelings. So it's starting to look like autism, isn't it? It's vital for emotional recognition. If you can't recognise your emotions, meltdowns can come from nowhere without good interoception. Again, it's all starting to add up. And if we don't understand ourselves, how on earth do we understand others? And they wonder if it's a basis for what they believe, what they used to believe was poor empathy for, I've put neurotypical people, I meant neurodiverse people. I will say at this point that they're beginning to disprove that. So there's this idea of double empathy. So the old idea that people with autism didn't have empathy, they've pretty much shown that that's not true, that they just struggle to understand typical people. And actually, typical people have about as much empathy the other way around, if you see what I'm saying. So an autistic person communicates really well with another autistic person. A neurotypical person communicates really well with another neurotypical person. It's when we have to kind of swap that we struggle. So that's that really. So yeah, interoception's interesting, but we're still learning lots more about it at the moment. Okay, so the doubters. Well, actually, what I was going to say about interoception and people with autism, actually, and empathy, I think that very often when you come across somebody who appears to have empathy when they're autistic, that's because they're having to think about it. And I just think that's wonderful. And, you know, how easy for me to be able to see somebody and just kind of instantly know in my body how they're feeling. You know, the saying, the thought that counts. Well, a person with autism has to look and has to really, really think about how that person's feeling. I don't think that's lack of empathy. In fact, I think that's enhanced empathy, really. Okay, as I said, for the doubters. So I don't buy it. He can cope with this and he can do that. Okay, so we get these kind of presentations where sometimes they like touch and sometimes they don't like touch, and in the end people say, oh, it's a load of old rubbish. Right, well, the senses are really, really complex. So light touch, deep touch, social touch, oral touch, they're all essentially different things because they all go on different wires in your body, different nerves. So you can be sensitive to light touch but seek deep touch and seek social touch. It makes sense to me because I understand it. Some learning is hardwired and it can take place without the bottom of the pyramid, the foundations being properly in place. So, for example, walking, you've got, remember the primitive reflexes, where you've got one that makes you walk, haven't you? If you hold a baby up, a really young baby, it will walk in the air. And that's what helps us to walk. So just because someone can walk doesn't mean they're not dyspraxic. But I'm very interested if I haven't seen somebody crawl. Because I think that's always a pretty good sign that something's a bit amiss. And then the other crucial thing is you can still learn if you're motivated, even if you've got a dyspraxia or a sensory integration problem, but you're learning from the bottom of that pyramid or wherever you are on that pyramid. So whereas most of us put each layer of the pyramid down, and then when we're at that top bit, that academic learning bit, we're just doing this amount of learning each time. The kids with dyspraxia or other sensory integration difficulties are learning from the bottom. So each bit of learning is this much. God, life's tough, really tough and exhausting. They're exhausted. And we call those splinter cell skills. So again, that might not be so relevant to your children, but this one will be. There is also a learn element to behaviour. So a behaviour is only sensory the first time it happens, purely. I mean, it continues being sensory, but they've always had a consequence. There's always kind of external stuff going on around, and so there's always a learn part to it. And especially if the children are very sociable, and I kind of get the impression that most of your guys are very sociable. So, you know, depending on how you react will kind of influence whether they continue with the behaviour or whether they stop that behaviour. So there's always that to it as well. Okay. So what do us ASI practitioners do? So we assess and we treat by providing the opportunities for the developmental experiences. In other words, we start building that pyramid from the bottom. So we try and address the underlying dysfunction and put those building blocks in place. And to do that, to get those building blocks in place, we have to have an adaptive response from the child. So we set them a challenge and they've got to rise to the challenge and achieve. Because that's how the connection gets built. It's not sensory stimulation. So, you get these snoozling rooms. That's not sensory integration. It might be very nice if your child likes that sort of thing. Some children don't like that sort of thing. Can you imagine if you're sensitive to light and you're in there? Goodness me. But that's not sensory integration because you're not getting the adaptive response. There's no connection made. Brushing as well. You might have heard of brushing. We have to be careful what I say, but yeah, brushing people can be a bit dodgy if they're tactile defensive, unless you really know what you're doing. And again, you're not asking for an adaptive response. And that's just a little picture of Gene there, who kind of pioneered everything. Oh, it's gone the wrong way. So, forgetting what I was going to tell you. So there's increasing evidence for sensory integration, both for the underpinning neurology. So now we've got all these lovely scanners and things where kind of proving all of the stuff that Gene talked about 30 odd years ago, really. And there is also some very good research projects coming out now to prove sensory integration. But you might have heard sensory integration has had a bad press. Unfortunately, there's been some kind of efforts, I think, to try and undermine it, I think would be a good way of saying it, but based on confounded studies, really. So what they've done is they've actually researched something that's not sensory integration. So somebody's had an idea about something and set out to prove or disprove it, but actually it's not sensory integration because that's a very particular thing. As I said, it's not generally available on the NHS, and actually very few private practitioners offer it kind of according to perfect fidelity, because you'd need a certain kind of clinic space to do that. We can apply fidelity according to how we actually do the therapy itself. But what we can do is give ASI informed assessment, or do ASI informed assessment and give advice, and we call that sensory based interventions, that advice generally. And again, research has been mixed, but again there's been some confounded studies really around that. So for example, they've kind of the biggest criticism really is they've set a research question like something like, do weighted blankets work? And then they've issued weighted blankets to hundreds of children, well, not that many usually, and they have then kind of looked at children's responses. But what we would say is what they've not done is they've not assessed whether the child needs the weighted blanket. So it's a bit bananas really. So recently, this year, there's been a new study out that actually does start to prove it. Now, it also has its limitations, this study. You know how these studies are, always at the bottom, they say the limitations of this study are. And it needs replicating, but it is very, very promising. So what they found is that if you assess a child and work out what their sensory profile is, and then pick a sensory-based intervention to match that sensory profile, that actually it's very, very helpful indeed. So there is hope there. As OTs, we're very good at getting on with the job, but we're not very good at researching, but we're improving. So what can I take away from this? So assessment is crucial from somebody who's suitably qualified. So in terms of qualifications, if you're interested in this sort of thing, look for a minimum in this country anyway of a PG cert, sensory integration, or CASI classy to module 4. You're not going to remember this, so you'll get this, so you can refer back to it if you want to. Or ICASI, which is the international levels, and that's level 2. And ask for evidence, don't take somebody's word for it. There's lots of people doing this work, saying they're doing this work, who haven't got this level of qualification. Look for additional training in key areas. So if you're concerned about your child's eating, have they done additional courses on feeding, for example? Look for experience. As I said, it's all right doing the training, but you learn on the job, really. You know, how much experience have people got? Check what they will do. They need to be prepared to read up on the child, do questionnaires, do interviews, do clinical observations in various settings, school, home, wherever. As about, you know, as a minimum, really. Quite often you get people just doing the questionnaires. It's just not good enough. It really isn't. And are they going to do sensory-based intervention, or are they going to do ASI? Which is it that you want? So that's what I'd be thinking about if I was employing somebody like me. Oh, God. So how do you find a therapist? So obviously you can try the NHS. Most children's services have somebody who's got a fair idea, but maybe not qualified to that level. Or you can go to the Royal College of OT, specialist section, independent practice. So there's a link there. If you get this, you'll be able to click on the link. But look for all those things. You won't find me on there. Right. There's so much out there. I really don't need to advertise. I will probably be there in future, because at the moment you have to pay on there, and they're thinking about making it free, in which case I might as well go on there. But that's how you find a therapist. Some top tips for you guys, probably while you're all here. Just keep an eye on the time. Okay, we're good. So I have said, haven't I, that you need to get people assessed, and that you need to think that everybody's different, therefore how can top tips work for everybody? But there are some that generally will work for a lot of people. So the first thing is think regulation first, as I said before. And how do we do that? So if you've got a flippy floppy child who's a bit under alert, this is one of the hardest things to do, because I'm really reluctant to give you advice on this without assessing the child first, because I don't know if I'm going to tell you something that's going to set off a sensitivity. So it really does need to be personalised. But examples are things like citrus tastes and citrusy smells, piney smells, upbeat music. You can imagine how that's going to alert you. Be very careful about touch. Unless you've got a profile and you know what you're doing with that. Okay, this will be a bit more helpful. Calming is what we all want, especially this time of night. So these can help you achieve a calm alert state. So do you remember that kind of ladder that we looked at, where we had under, we had calm alert, and then we had over, and then we had shut down? So if you're high, or even if you're low but you're ready to go to sleep, these are the things that might work. So deep touch and pressure. Okay, so this is where hugs and things come in, and you can use weight and compression. Now I know you guys have some difficulties very often with brittle bones, so you'd have to be really, really careful with that. Low frequency vibration, the same. Neutral temperature, it's a bit obvious, that one. Soft, slow, rhythmic music, and sweet vanilla tastes and smells. Okay. And then we've got the ones that are organising. So these are great, because these help us to calm or alert, really. They're just ideal to get us into that calm alert state from a place of low or high arousal. And what they will do as well is they'll help out with praxis by just kind of priming your neurological system, really, to perform. So that can be really helpful. And this, I think, might be more helpful for you guys, which is linear vestibular stimulation. So in typical people, they've worked out that has a 6 to 8 hour effect. So this is the sort of thing, if you did it in the morning and you did it lunchtime, say, and then you did it, I don't know, after school, then you're starting to build what we call a sensory diet or sensory nourishment. And what I mean by linear vestibular stimulation, you start to see this with infants, and this is when we rock our infants. Okay, and you can see how calming that is. And what that does is it fires off a little nugget you've got in your inner ear, or two little nuggets actually, called your otolith organs. And they tell you about where you are in the world. They tell you about gravity, and they tell you about movement, forward, back, up, down, side to side. So that's what you're looking for, really. So things like swings are really nice. Going out for walks, being pushed along in the buggy, you name it. There's all sorts of things. Being bounced, or bouncing yourself, because really you want the adaptive response. And I think that's really good for you guys, actually, because it's a way of helping you to regulate, but without too much concern about the brittle bones, if that's impacting your child. So as I said, those are the principles of a sensory diet. So build them in regularly through the day, but also use them to, if you know you've got something coming up that's going to be a nightmare, then use them to help get ready for that. And even during. So something that I know some people do is if they take a child for a haircut and they know that's going to be problematic, they'll take a weighted lap pad and just pop it on the child's lap to help with regulation then. And afterwards, yeah, go out and go back to the swings and have a swing. Okay, so in terms of that kind of discrimination and dyspraxia side, so watch for your little guys setting themselves little physical challenges for themselves through play. Now, Maria and I had a really good talk about this, I remember, because at the time Kai was in his climbing phase, and I think Maria was having kittens. But it's good, really, because it's normal development. So it's evidence of the inner drive to develop through play. And it's really, really important, and play is really important. So what we've got to do is kind of find a way of helping your guys do that, but safely. So lots of soft play opportunities, I would say, to try and allow for that whenever possible. And this is the stuff that kids should be doing until they're about 7. If you go to kind of Scandinavia, they're not sitting in classrooms, and they're not exactly known for being backwards, are they, over there? Because what that's doing is that's putting in those building blocks at the bottom of that pyramid. Okay, so I always say that I'm going to run around in the garden and doing a bit of climbing and goodness knows what else, that's better for handwriting than handwriting. That's how you practice your handwriting at that age. I get a bit cross when I hear people talking about how good their child's handwriting is and they're free, because that's not the way we're designed to develop. I was going to say something else, it's gone. So yeah, my point about this, I suppose, isn't it, if you're concerned about your child's bones, it's tricky, this stuff, isn't it? But then what you've got to think about is as they get older, and especially as they get taller, when they've got further to fall, if they don't develop their vestibular systems very well, then actually they're at more risk from falling over because the balance is poor. So it's a real, excuse the pun, but it is a real balancing act. How much do you promote kind of this physical play, and how much do you protect the bones, because it's all a bit circular, unfortunately. So it's just food for thought. I haven't got any strong answers on that. Other top tips, so I've alluded to this already, watch what you reinforce. Some difficult behaviours are part of natural development. So you get all sorts of things, don't you? Kids mouthing things and spitting at things and doing all sorts of crazy, peculiar things. It's just normal stuff. But especially when you've got a bit of a delay, sometimes it can come when they're a bit older, and it's a bit harder for people to stomach. As I said, behaviour is only purely sensory the first time it happens. After that, we've always got kind of people's reactions to think about. And any response, including a telling off, will be reinforcing for a sociable child. This is why we say ignore poor behaviour, or individual, not just children. And as I said, I get the feeling your guys are really, really sociable. So this is a real risk for you lot. Just have faith in the natural drive to develop, because if these are normal developmental stages they're going through, they will come out the other end, unless they sort of end up stopping there, and then you'll struggle. But the answer is, and I know it sounds very easy for me sitting here to say this, but differentially reinforce other behaviours. So make a big fuss about the good stuff and just try and ignore the bad stuff. And I tell you where parents go wrong, and I see this all the time. It's when granny's around, or the neighbour who's a bit judgmental, and you have to look like you're, you know, bringing your child up well. That's when we make our greatest mistakes. And me too, I've been there. And unhelpful advice, well, in my day, and all of this, just try and ignore it. And ignore it in the moment, and then go away, think about it, and then come back with a reasoned response is my advice. Easier said than done. So we come to our little research project that we've been doing. Might find the right page. So let's have a quick look at this chat. Oh, we've got a few on here. Alison, have you I'm going to read through these later, but I'm going to go over to Alison because she was going to keep an eye on them and see if we've got some kind of common presentations.
A couple of your slides definitely invoked lots of responses from many of us. So the over reactivity in our children, you know, a lot of them won't sit still for long at all. Interception, recognizing the overeating as one example. Also the emotional recognition with the meltdowns coming out of nowhere. Meltdowns. We've got lots of comments about the unprompted meltdowns. Let's see, and then I think we just had a couple of questions in here too. One mom mentioned about the sensory seeking, unfortunately putting things up their nose or in their mouth that you're unaware of. So if anybody else has anything else to add it in the chat or unmute yourself.
No takers. Okay, let's finish the presentation and then I'll come on to the questions if that's okay. Mm-hmm. Right. So, oh, what's happened to my screen share? Right, bear with me, my PowerPoint's just decided to stop working. I don't know why that is. How strange.
Just add one more. Impulsivity, that's a big one.
Okay. Okay, I don't know what happened there. So, is there a SATB2 sensory profile? So, I hear everything you say. These are some of the ideas that I've had as well. So, I kind of got some of these features off your website for SATB2. So, hypotonia, so this kind of floppiness. Yeah, I mean, I see that all the time as poor posture, and I see that as rooted in poor vestibular discrimination. So I suspect a lot of your guys are a bit wobbly on their feet, probably. Dyspraxia and speech ataxia, again off your website. You could see the guy, couldn't you, on the video, how the difficulty that he was having with his speech, and that's dyspraxia as well, obviously, that he's got. You know, that's sensory, that's rooted in poor proprioception, poor tactile, as well as the poor vestibular discrimination. Okay, hyperactivity, this is the one that you guys really picked out. So that can be the result of sensory reactivities. So being very, very sensitive to stuff, just driving you crazy and you know, running around and goodness knows what else. Sensory underreactivities. So this is when they then seek, and then that seeking becomes the hyperactive behavior, and then they get so into it they can't stop seeking, and then they're over aroused and off we go. And then you can have kind of everything mixing together, including the poor interoception, and that'll impact on activities like sleeping, which again I picked up off the website, feeding, mood, behaviour, and kind of all that adds together to be sort of autistic tendencies, whatever they are. So yeah, I think there's strong evidence for, I'm getting some lovely smiles there, there's strong evidence for kind of a sensory aspect really to SATB2, I would say, just as one person having not done any research. So you can get more information on sensory integration for free. There's an organisation called the Sensory Integration Education, sorry, they've changed their name. And those are the links. So there's a link there to what is sensory integration. It'll tell you more about the sort of stuff that I've been talking about. You can do courses, those you do have to pay for, but they're really reasonable actually. They try to make them very accessible. So usually about £20 or something like that. And you can actually apply to be a member for free of that organisation and get newsletters and things like that. There's always lots of top tips and fun things on those. And then there's all sorts of forums and goodness knows what else that you'll be able to find from there. So, any questions? So I'm going to start with Hannah's question because that came into me in advance. And I prepared my answers, but now I've lost it. I might have to talk off the cuff. Yeah, what have I done with those? No idea. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so Hannah asked a question. Are there any sensory issues that we may have to be aware of when we start toilet training and ways to overcome these? So what I would say is, first of all, kind of it depends on age, cognitive ability, and what the sensory profile is. As I said, people are vastly different and depending on what difficulties you have, it kind of might impact on kind of what difficulties you particularly have with toilet training. That said, there are some answers I can give. So before you even start toilet training, I would say try and build a bit more interoceptive awareness. So do things like body talk about your child's body, your body, what different things feel like. Just try and get into the habit of kind of chatting through, it doesn't even have to be just toilet stuff, but it could be anything. But regarding the toilet stuff, I'm sorry, it's going to be a bit gross. I need a wee. Oh, I can feel it right down low here. Oh, I'm almost bursting, and I'm feeling really full down there. Just talk about it as much as you can, just to sort of draw awareness to that. You will find there's stories, I'm sure you know those are out there, that kind of talk about this whole thing. Just generally try and build their awareness first without any pressure at all. Play, those tiny tears dolls that are also wet, that's a good idea. Just play with it. We all just try and remember we do develop through play, so play with it. That's what I'd advise. Think about those sensory diet ideas. So try and kind of build that, that swinging or that proprioception, those exercises, or just physical play in, because that will just help the general body awareness. Then look for signs that the child is aware that they need to go. There's no point starting too early, and for you guys it's going to be really difficult to time when that is, because you're not going to be able to go on kind of the usual sort of guidance. So look at when it looks like they think they you start to see sort of cross legs and sort of a bit of bouncing. Those are usually fair signs. Don't rush, don't show your hand. It's the worst thing you can do. Just have faith in the natural drive. The child, if a child is able to do it, they will want to do it. If they're not doing it, it's either because you've reinforced something else and then you've got a problem, or it's just because they can't. So what's the point in getting stressed about it? There is none. There's no point at all. Okay, and this is where you have to be really good at ignoring granny or the neighbour or whoever it is that's going to give you loads and loads of advice that's not going to help. Only reinforce the positive. Okay. Potty toilet training, it's a nightmare, isn't it? Because it's such hard work, and it's your carpet generally at the end of the day, so it is hard. So just try try and button it, try and button your feelings. And if, you know, you might have to take a step back for you, not just for the child. Ensure your Lucy or your potty supports good posture. So have a look at their posture. You know, this is really hard for me to advise like this, but you know, if they're very, very slumped on it, it's going to be really, really difficult. So have a think about if there's any way that you can improve that. What else? Just be aware as well. Just get that bit sorted. Don't worry about wiping, because if they've got poor proprioception, wiping is one of the hardest things, because you're relying on kind of feeling what's going on behind you and you can't see. Okay, so that's a whole other issue, wiping. Just concentrate on getting on the pot to start with. Except you might not get there. I think I've covered that. And if you don't get there, and depending on level of learning disability, there's always accommodations when you get older. So once a child gets older, you can sort of sometimes teach them that if they haven't got the interoception and they don't really know when they need to go regularly, and you can start sort of building in routines and things. So there's always that way as well. Yeah, but my top tip is to really, really try hard not to get stressed. So I hope that helps. Well, Gemma's got her hand up. So have you got a question, Gemma?
Hi, Karen. Yeah, I did just put it on the chat. It's just about, I mean, my little one, she's only 4, and I don't think that she has awareness of when she needs to go. Like, she often, if you take her nappy off, she'll just do it on the floor seconds later. But sometimes she will go and hide to go for a number 2. I mean, it's not consistent, but you know, you said about talking to them about, I mean, obviously we do, oh, we need a wee wee, look, mummy's doing a wee wee, but adapting it for a younger, sometimes she doesn't really have the interest and the concentration even to listen to what you're saying to her. So do you think to wait until she's a bit older?
Yeah, I would, but just keep on with all that stuff.
Okay.
Keep on with all that, just keep talking, and it might seem pointless, but it is worth doing. And eventually, do you remember what I said? It's the inner drive, it's there. All children want to develop. The only time that won't come through is if we've reinforced something that we shouldn't have done. So just have faith in your child. And if they're going to get there, they will. And if not, there's no point beating yourself up. There's no point beating yourself up.
Oh, I worry she's going to school.
Sorry.
But she also has this thing that she does where she has her tongue out quite a lot, and she licks like the surface when she's playing at the table, when she's in the kitchen. I don't really understand why she does that. Yeah,
again, that's kind of normal developmental stuff. It's just a little bit late, which you might expect. So all babies mouth things. It just sometimes it carries on a bit longer than it should, or it starts a bit later than it should, if you like. So what I would do there is kind of introduce play activities where that's fine. So, you know, playing with dough and things like that, you know, the stuff that you can eat that's not going to cause any problems. Messy play with food, anything like that. Yeah, okay. Don't worry about it. Just don't show your hand. That's all I will say. Because as soon as you start getting stressed about it, they'll realise that it's a very good game to play, and that's when you run into problems. But again, it's just normal stuff.
Lovely.
I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, it does.
Anybody else? We've got Vivian's got a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that our David actually didn't get clean until he was 14.
There you go.
And then
everybody.
It happened in a really short time. And what was happening with him, he wasn't recognising the sensations. So he'd had a lot of catheters when he was a baby, so we weren't too sure whether there was damage, but there wasn't. And a very clever classroom assistant at his school said to me one day, I'm going to spend hours with him sitting on the toilet with jugs of water so that he sees every time he goes, and I'm going to clap. And then I did the same thing. It was a nightmare. I did the same thing. And the penny just dropped with him. But he was 14 and he was so thrilled. He was so thrilled. So even if it doesn't, I just want to say to all the mums, even if it doesn't seem to be happening, don't give up, it will.
Exactly. I suspect that very talented TA probably spotted the drive in him, the inner drive coming out. That's what we respond to. That's brilliant. What a good story. Yeah. Anybody else? Was there anything on the chat, Alison, that I missed?
One more question, Maria. Did you want to ask it, or did you want me to read it?
No, I just basically Kai slaps a lot of things, and he will do it when he's happy, but his compulsiveness at the moment is he's absolutely obsessed with the telly and putting YouTube on the telly, and obviously, like his tablet, he likes to flick through it quite frequently, and if he has the hump, he'll go and smack the telly. If there's something that's on there that he doesn't want to watch, he'll smack the telly. If he chooses the right thing, he'll smack the telly. And I'm sure it's part of his compulsiveness and a habit, but also it's so consistent. And I just wondered whether that's also sensory seeking because of the feedback that he gets from it, because he'll smack other objects as well, or people, but hard surfaces. But the smacking of the telly, because that's what he's infatuated with at the moment, is so it's just constant. So just yeah, any advice of how we can help that?
We see that sounds like proprioception seeking. And possibly him knowing where he is in space. So quite a lot of people I've got people, colleagues who are autistic who, you know, don't have a learning disability, or talk about tapping sort of door frames and things to know where they are, just to get a bit more. So that could be where it's come from, because you say he'll tap or slap lots of different things, and then I would imagine that, as you say, the telly is kind of what's holding his attention at the moment, so that's kind of getting more of it. What do you do about it? Let's think about this. I'm just wondering have you tried, I don't know, what about those water pillows? Do you know the ones I mean, where you can quite often get them for babies, where you put them on the high chair and you fill them with water and they've got fish and things in, and you slap them and you get a response, because the kind of water floats about and so do the fish and things inside. Just get something that's designed to be used in that way and just try and draw his attention that way. Don't know if you tried anything like that, Maria.
We do have one of them that he uses in the bath,
Right.
but yeah, we could do something like that. I know something similar that we used to make at school as well, is they used to put paint inside an A4 sheet zipper and then seal it, and then that might give the same, or even maybe a hot water bottle.
Yeah. Thing with the hot water bottle, you get there, because what I'm looking for is there something that will draw in more than the TV? So yeah, I mean, a hot water bottle it will have the same effect feeling wise, but I was just thinking, you know, is there something a bit more multi-sensory than that? Just knowing Kai, obviously, that might draw him a bit more. So I was thinking about something like that with glitter in, or do you see what I'm saying? So I just gradually try and draw him away from it.
Yeah,
keeps you on your toes, doesn't he? Yeah. Has anybody else got any other ideas?
Put a screen protector on the telly just to protect the telly, but I know it's only a matter
yeah,
of
protect him.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
I had a question. This has been great, Karen. So I know for me, when you talked about the behaviors, like the meltdowns that just seem to be out of nowhere, and then there was a lot of comments in the chat feature about that as well. What can we do? Like when we can't, you know, everybody has always said to me, well, you have to take a couple of steps back and figure out what triggered that, and then I do, and I still can't figure it out. So what can we do when there's the behaviors with the meltdown or the hair pulling or slapping somebody. And for me, it's usually targeted at me as the mom and not necessarily other people.
So it's a really difficult one. In terms of looking at triggers, look a bit further back. But, you know, that's what I would say is, you know, what's happened kind of not immediately before, but before because that's the point, isn't it? Is that if their interoception's poor, they'll have started winding up a way back, but it suddenly comes over them. So look for triggers before. How old's your little one, Alison?
She's 7.
7. Okay. So in terms of how to cope with it, what do you do now? Do you hold her or?
You know, I usually tell her no. If it's bad, you know, depending what it is, I put her in timeout and walk away. So
right, yeah, I mean that's a good strategy because you're not reinforcing it that way. In terms of calming, we're talking about our kind of deep touch, but this is always a bit of a tricky one because I wouldn't advise that you restrain your child really, but there's a fine line, isn't there, between a hug and a restraint. But then a hug, you might feel that you're kind of reinforcing it, so it's very difficult for me to advise. But I'd be trying to get deep touch in somehow, but preferably before it gets too far. Or if you, I mean, she's 7, so is she mobile, Alison? She's on a fit. Yeah. So you're not going to be strapping her into a buggy or anything like that. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Sometimes sitting on the floor together helps if that doesn't make you vulnerable. Just kind of reinforcing that connection with the earth, especially on your tummy. If you can get on your tummy. If you ever noticed how typical toddlers will tantrum on their tummies. The ones who tantrum on their backs, it goes on forever, and they tend to be driving themselves around the room by sort of walking themselves around backwards on their backs. And I think the reason for that is because that's where we calm on our tummies. So if you see a toddler having a tantrum, or you see a grieving widow on I don't know, in the Middle East, or you see a teenager who's just been dumped by a boyfriend and throws herself on her bed, it's always on your tummy. That's what typical people do. We calm on our tummies. So if you can get her on her tummy in a positive way without kind of forcing her down there, that's always quite good as well. You know, the flip side is if you see a teenager who's just been told the most romantic thing in the world by a boyfriend, she'll throw herself on the bed, but on her back, because that's where we're kind of open and dreaming, and you know, but calming tummy always.
Thank you.
But don't restrain on tummies, because that is very, very dangerous indeed.
And Harjet's got her hand up.
Oh yes, hello.
You don't want my video on, that's okay, I'll keep it off.
No, that's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, it was just a question about sensory issues relating to teeth, mouth, teeth brushing, and also hair washing.
Yeah.
We still, even now, she gets really, really upset with having her head tilted back.
Okay.
And washing her hair. And also brushing teeth. She's getting much better.
When you brush her teeth, are you stood behind her and tilting her head back?
No. In fact, actually, she's brushing herself.
Okay.
And we have a timer.
Lovely. All right. So the two things are likely to be two different things, just from what you've said. So if we take one at a time, so if we take teeth first, that's likely to be oral tactile sensitivity, probably. Has she got an electric toothbrush?
Yes.
She has. Okay. Does she do better with that?
She does. She doesn't brush for very long. But
no, okay.
we do get some brushing, yes.
Yeah. So that would have been my top tip. Electric toothbrush. Is she bothered by the taste of the toothpaste, do you think?
Yes, she is.
Okay. What do you use?
So I've tried various toothpaste, and we're on a really mild one.
Right. Okay.
But I just wonder if I need to. Yeah, and she's still. Yeah, it's one that's targeted for still like 5-year-olds still, but I don't know whether the fluoride content is enough. I'm pretty sure it is.
Worry about that. I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah.
It's much more important that you don't kind of get, I can sound like a broken record, that you get stressed about it.
Yeah.
You know, just do what you can. There is, I don't know if it's still available, a toothpaste called Buddies that was specially formulated for autistic kids. You might have a look and see if that's still available.
Okay.
So electric toothbrush, time is a really good plan. I'm just trying to think, I'll have a look in a minute, because I did a report on somebody for teeth and I can't quite remember what we recommended in the end, but if I have a look and I find something else, I'll email Maria to pass it on.
Thank you.
But yeah, no problem. What's the other things? Yeah, just to be very careful though that you don't tilt her head back. It's a bit difficult without seeing her.
So the head tilting, so with the hair washing, we go now onto the hair washing, that it really distresses her, and I've tried so many techniques, tactics, counting really quickly to 10 so that we can just get bubbles out. It's just, it's really traumatic, and I just don't know what else I can do to help.
Sorry, Ajit, how is she on swings and things like that?
Loves them.
Loves them. Oh, that's quite interesting. So she's quite happy to have her feet off the ground.
Yes.
Okay, because I was wondering if she's what we call gravitationally insecure, but it doesn't sound like it. She not worried about falling over or anything like that. Doesn't really bother her. Not bothered about stairs. Okay.
No.
So it sounds like maybe it was more like the water going in her eyes that's bothering her, perhaps.
Yeah, and we've tried this. We've had this rim that you can put around the forehead, but she won't tolerate that.
Okay, that might be the touch.
Yeah, I literally, sometimes there are still bubbles left in her, and I think it doesn't matter. I just don't want to distress her anymore. But I think actually maybe the water going into her eyes, that really upsets her.
Okay.
So,
and are you using a jug or a shower?
A shower head. She can just about tolerate that.
Okay.
I have to be really quick, even with the jug.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have to be really. I don't know whether it's the action of having her head back. I can't really figure out what it is. It's a combination of things, probably. Yeah,
I think it's unlikely to be the head back thing, because she doesn't sound gravitationally insecure. It might be, but that's not worrying me so much now that we've had this conversation. But it's probably more likely to be water going in her eyes. And if you imagine with your head back, you sort of almost expose yourself to that. It's quite scary, isn't it, if you're bothered about that? Gosh, I don't know what to advise you, really. I'll have a look for you, Harjit, and see if I can see any kind of recommendations on the forums and things.
That would be helpful.
Really, really tricky.
Yeah, we use her dolls. So if she's in the bath or even in the shower, then we'll model it on her dolls first.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a good idea.
And then she will. So I'll just say, look up like Barbie, or whoever is in the box with her. And then we'll do it that way. So, yeah. But again, it's very, very quick.
Oh, Jess, can I ask you, how is she when you brush her hair?
Again, have to be really quick.
So could it be a sensitive scalp? No, because she loves head massage. She just likes massages and that pressure. So I can do her head,
I can massage her head, I can touch her head, I can touch her hair. It's hair washing. It's just, yeah, I don't know if it's just the feeling of the water or being splashed.
That sounds most likely to me, I have to be honest. I'm just trying to think. Harjit, I'm going to mull it over.
No, that's okay. It was just, yeah, something that we've tried to
Maria
work on.
Yeah, it is really, really tough, and she will probably grow out of it.
Because we had lots of OT input when she was little, and our therapist said that a lot of it is learnt behaviour as well.
Yeah, don't get hung up on that either, even though I've banged on about that as well. As professionals, we can be a bit mean about going on about learned behaviour as well. You know, we're all human beings, aren't we?
Yeah. Thank you. I won't take up too much time.
No, that's all right. I'm just wondering if you can get somebody who's close in the family to video you doing it. If you can do it on, not to show me, to show her back, and to show how careful you're being not to get the water into her eyes, so that, because that's the thing as well, though, she's got her head tipped back and she's really, really vulnerable, and she's probably got her eyes squeezed shut, I'm guessing. Is that right?
Yes.
So she's completely vulnerable. So I wonder if you video her having it done, and then she can watch that and see that perhaps it's not as scary, and about how careful you're being. Whether that might work, I don't know without knowing your child, unfortunately, but that seems like a worthwhile strategy to me, because she's so exposed and she's so vulnerable with her head tipped back.
So I feel as if it feels as if it's quite torturous, because
it's hard.
And I just think, oh, you know, I'm not doing anything to hurt you, so yeah. The other thing is to try and put weight through somehow, but that is tricky in the bath, and that might be where you bring somebody else in to hold her hands and give her hands a little squeeze and tell her it's all right. So it might be a two-person job, because just to get that comfort through squeezing her hands. So what that does is just adds in that calming deep touch. It's the best way I can think about doing it, but obviously you're not an octopus and you will need help with that to do the task and to do the calming. That's quite interesting, actually, because recently I've had both the girls in the bath together, and so my middle daughter has said to me, can I wash her hair? And actually, thinking back now, things seem to be fine. Now that you just mentioned that, that's only just jogged my memory now.
Well, we'll mull that over and see if that's got any legs. Yeah.
Sounds good.
So, deep touch, and maybe try the video thing.
Thank you.
Obviously, don't video anything that you shouldn't. just a face. But yeah, good.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Pleasure, in fact. Anybody else? Anybody else on the chat, Alison? You've been keeping an eye.
Yeah, I've been watching, and I think we've caught everybody's comments and questions. So this has been fabulous.
Brilliant. Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Maria, did you have anything else?
No, I think that's pretty much everything. I think Karen's done amazing, just to be able to almost pretty much talk without taking a drink as well. Bless you. You've done absolutely amazing. So yeah, honestly, thank you so much for going through everything that you've gone through, and it'll be really nice to actually even watch this back again and sort of take in some of the earlier definitions as well, because I think sometimes as parents that's where you can feel a little bit lost, with all the definitions and stuff. So you hear things along the way, but actually understanding what they mean makes a big difference as well. So no, thank you ever so much, and I really hope that some of the parents, you know, find, even sometimes it might be something really obvious, but then somebody just mentioning it just makes that big difference as well. So thank you, Karen and Alison, for setting up the Zoom as well, and being our tech support of the evening.
Yes.
So
thank you, Alison.
yeah.